So Chelsea finished their pre-season of 2024 with a 1-1 draw against Inter Milan at Stamford Bridge. Just got back from the game, literally just got back from the game, got my sunglasses here because it was absolutely boiling at the bridge today. And that it wasn't the nicest weather. Like, I'm sure visually it looked good when you're watching it, if you're watching it at home. But it was a little bit boiling in London, and it's classic, British thing. Wait all summer for good weather, and then we moan about it when it eventually arrives. But it was nice to actually physically be at a game for the first time this season. And I think from my vantage point, from my seat in the stand-up, I'm quite lucky in the sense that I get to see the whole pitch. So there are always things when you're actually there at a game, tactically and technically, and just in terms of the players and performance, that maybe you don't get when you're watching on TV. So it was nice to actually see that. And to be fair, it was one of Chelsea's better performances of pre-season. It wasn't outstanding. It still had one or two really shaky moments, and I think relatively big questions walking into next weekend. But it certainly was not a disaster. It certainly was not to the level and extent of problems that we saw against Man City, against even Real Madrid, very recently. So I think in that sense, for Maresca, especially in front of his own fans, it was a positive. It wasn't the win, I'm sure, that most of us would have liked to have seen. It wasn't the most overly convincing performance for sure, but I think some of that was down to personnel. Let's just get straight into it. I think that it was a bit of a shame that we didn't see Cole Palmer, Christopher Nkunku, even late on. I know people really don't like him, but I thought even Raheem Sterling, from brief glimpses I've got of him so far in pre-season, he still has his Sterling moments where he goes way off it and he makes some really bad decisions. But in terms of his energy, in terms of his directness and just technique, I still ponder whether he's going to find himself getting some first team minutes. But of course, the main two, and especially, of course, Cole Palmer. Cole Palmer, I mean, you think this guy won the World Cup for Chelsea, won the Champions League for Chelsea last year. The noise inside Stamford Bridge when Cole Palmer was mentioned right at the start, because he wasn't even starting. He was on the bench when he went out to warm up, on the sideline during the first half. And of course, when he came on at half time, I mean, it was staggering. And the noise that came from that crowd for Cole Palmer, and it kind of sums up how big of a deal Cole Palmer is and how much he means to Chelsea fans now, given it wasn't even 12 months ago. I mean, it was late in the window, wasn't it? Almost deadline day when we signed him. So it's staggering how much the meteoric rise of Cole Palmer as a footballer, and especially in the minds of Chelsea fans, has been crazy. But I think valid, given how amazing he was last year. And I think that was kind of a big conversation point for me that we'll get to, over his positioning, over what he's going to look like. The first half, Mark Guiu, I think, and I hope his injury isn't bad, because he has had a really positive pre-season. Given this is a guy who's only bought for about 6 million, still 18, still very raw, still very ragged at times, but boy, can he work hard. And I think the way he presses, I think, is a really nice trait to have. He doesn't give up any ball. And I also think from an opposing centre-back, he's probably the sort of centre-forward you don't want to play. I guess a Leicester comparison for Maresca is, Jamie Vardy, the sort of striker who just doesn't let you breathe. And I think for a team who need their press to be a lot more coordinated than it has been over pre-season, it very much felt like Mark Guiu was leading that today, and actually, forced Jan Sommer into two good stops, and was being a little bit unorthodox. And, he is, of course, raw. I think at times his first touch isn't amazing, but I'm not going to castigate him for that, because he's a very young forward, and I can't expect him to have, the refinement of a 28-year-old, because obviously that's unfair on him. But I hope he doesn't get loaned. I really don't. I mean, I know Samu Amorodian's about to come in, and we could still sign Victor Osimhen, but I think, given what I've seen in pre-season, I wouldn't mind seeing Guiu stick around and see what he could contribute. Hopefully he isn't getting, a long-term injury, and because he did call to be taken off, and I did worry it was a hamstring injury, so we'll see how that plays out. The first half, unfortunately, was more, again, concerns over defence. Chelsea played a lot of nice passes. Marco Correa was back in, and it kind of felt actually more that Malo Gusto was inverting in that first half rather than it was Marco Correa. Correa, to me, and it was maybe the same as well for Renato Vega in the second, it seemed like to me we were still kind of looking at that right-hand side as the player that was going to invert. That slightly changed in the second half, as we'll discuss, but Thuram looked another level, and he looked like he was bossing Chelsea's defence, and the ease to which they carved us open for that first goal. Nice flowing move, great finish. It's the finish of a player playing in the Champions League. I've been a fan of Thuram for some time, all the way back when he was at Borussia Mönchengladbach. His all-round play, he really dominated in that first half, and I think Chelsea were quite lucky that he eventually got taken off because it was a pre-season friendly, because he, especially against Chelsea's high line, even when Wesley Fofana, Levi Colwill were kind of pressing, trying to take him out or trying to put pressure on him, he made Cucurella look silly in that first half. His physical build, his touch, his link up with his teammates, he added such a great focal point. And, I think it's another great test for Chelsea. This high line, I think, is going to be radically tested. There were even moments in the second half where I'm still very concerned about this high line and how easy a very smart team could find themselves in behind Chelsea's defence. I think it was DeMarco who put a really good shot towards Sanchez that was well saved, that stopped it going 2-0 early in the second half. It's not that Chelsea were as exposed as they have been in other games. In one way, that's a positive. But there are clear moments where that defence, that high line, looks like it could be exploited in a big way. I guess that was quite an obvious one. And it was very slack because the opening goal came straight after a water break, I think it was. So, yeah, I mean, at that point, I was kind of like, are we going to see a repeat of the other few games where Chelsea suddenly get opened up more? Half-time comes, we see Pedro Neto announced as expected. Palmer comes on, Nkunku comes on, Renato Vega comes on. Moises Caicedo replaces Romeo Lavia, kind of Caicedo sitting at the base of midfield with Enzo Fernandez playing, and Mudryk got a little bit more time. And Chelsea got progressively better as the second half got on. I think Chelsea... Still, for me, one of my tactical concerns already is just based on what I saw today, is we look a little bit lopsided and we look a little bit imbalanced when there were times in the first and second half when Chelsea would look to shift the ball from one side to the next very quickly to try and stifle, Inter were kind of playing a counter-attacking game. They were able to sit behind the ball and trying to get width, right? But it would seem weird that there'd be a lot of players isolated on one side of the pitch where the ball originally would be, as we were playing on nice little triangles. And then we'd look to move it across to the other side where you'd hope more space would open up and we'd stretch the Inter defence. But then what would happen is it would be like one player would receive the ball and he'd have absolutely no support around him and he was crowded out. This slightly changed in the second half by the introduction of Nkunku and Palmer, who of course very instinctively are smart players in between the lines, who suddenly created more problems for Inter. So they had problems centrally, and then out wide you had Malo Gusto and Mykhailo Mudryk, eventually Raheem Sterling. Renato Vega wasn't really playing a wing-back role. He very much was playing the role I think a lot of us expect, inverted left-back / left centre-back. So it was more that on the right side in that second half, Gusto. So I guess it's a nice thing that it doesn't look as rigid as on the kind of inverted fullback type things where Maresca clearly, at least in my opinion, based on what I saw today, there seems to be enough flexibility during a game that it will be quite fluid in the sense that some players will be allowed to go up. And I think the Cole Palmer positioning was the most interesting to me. He started the second half very wide on the right. And then I think what quickly happened was either by instinct from Palmer or either a conversation I did see Maresca and Palmer communicating was there, what you don't want is Palmer getting too... He can play right wing. I'm not saying he's never played right wing. Obviously, that's stupid. He started his Chelsea career. But obviously, as the season progressed and as he became more important, we know how vital and how devastating Palmer can be when he does drift centrally. So what happened as the half went on was it felt like Gusto was then playing... It became kind of a back three. You had Tosin eventually coming on, Badiashile eventually came on, and Vega. And then you had Gusto kind of playing right wing back / right wing, to be honest, to add width. And then you had Palmer with the license to move in. He played some really nice passes into the feet of Jackson, into the feet of Nkunku. Nkunku was a little bit wayward. He didn't quite have the influence. I think Mudryk set up a chance where Nkunku should have buried. Chelsea, even Palmer could have scored a goal, to be honest. So I think in the end, the Lesley Ugochukwu finish, it's funny that Lesley Ugochukwu has kind of prevented Chelsea losing at least 5 of their 6 pre-season games, because of course he equalised in the very first game late on against Wrexham and equalised here. But I still suspect that Lesley will be sent out on loan. So I think Chelsea deserved the draw at least. I mean, maybe you could argue based on the quality of chances in the second half, Chelsea could have actually won the game. Inter seemed to drop off. Inter made a load of changes late on, and maybe and Chelsea did as well. It's kind of the classic pre-season thing where the game momentum kind of shifts. Big questions. I still have faith that Chelsea can create opportunities. I think they've got the quality to. I think my big question is just how you all fit them together. Noni showed some bright moments in the first half. Mark Guiu did, but obviously Nicholas Jackson's back now. We've just signed Pedro Neto. Where does he fit in? Omarodian's coming in. It's more just the configuration of that attack for me. I think that it's got to have Palmer and Nkunku. I think those are the two players for me who I'm like, they need to be there. I think you need a focal point of those two players, and whether you deem that focal point Nicholas Jackson, who got his first minutes today, or Guiu, or Omarodian, or maybe even Victor Osimhen. That's obviously a big question. I think the bigger, larger, huge question for Chelsea and for Enzo Maresca is that defence. Yes, you could look at it and go Vega, the first significant minutes he's got of pre-season, and actually looked pretty decent. I think physically, he's a nice build. I like the look of him. I think he's going to handle himself well in the Premier League and put himself about. There are a few times where he had to make recovery tackles being out of position, and again, Chelsea at times look like they can be exploited by that high line and the way teams can kind of carve us open. That's a concern to me, but I think Vega did nothing wrong, and I think asserted himself well, and I think we'll get some plaudits. But it's more just who starts, because Fofana and Levi started as the centre-backs in the first half alongside Gusto and Cucurella. Based on the first half, you can look at the fact that Fofana, to me, still looks very wayward. He looks like a guy, and to be fair to him, he looks like a guy that hasn't played football for 12 months, and that's not, Fofana needs to be obviously an important player for Chelsea, but I'm not quite sure he looks ready enough for me to be starting the season for Chelsea. Am I being harsh? I don't know. Tosin, of course, has had some wild moments. Badiashile hasn't looked that convincing. Colwell hasn't either. So I can't really tell you right now there are like two centre-backs or at least one standout centre-back for me that I'm like, yeah, that's the guy I'm really putting my hopes on, and I'm not going to name him today, but it does pose the question because, of course, Axel Disasi was on the bench. Does he come back into the fray sooner rather than later? Because I don't think Chelsea will be signing any more centre-backs. So it's really about Maresca finding the combination. The only other thing is Chilwell didn't play, Jorgensen didn't play, and Chukwuemeka didn't play. Chukwuemeka, we've discussed Chilwell to death about his future, right? And Matt Law firmly believes that he won't be leaving. So that's an interesting conundrum in itself. Chukwuemeka is the one that I'm completely baffled by in terms of a player who can play in between the lines as an 8, who I think technically and what he could offer for Chelsea against deep defences. It's a real shame, and it really is. Tyreek George, of course, I don't even think was in the squad today. I think because now we've signed Neto, will he be going out on loan? Still big questions about the way this squad is going to look by the end of this month. But yeah, it wasn't a bad day. It certainly wasn't. It wasn't a great day. I think there were some positives more in attack than defence. I think the team passing-wise, maybe you could argue, got a little bit more confident and assured of themselves by the second half. I think we'll look at the minutes played today and maybe come to a conclusion that maybe those players will be deemed fit enough to play and start the game against City. But of course, it's another kettle of fish next week because serious stuff starts happening and people are going to start seriously judging Chelsea. There's not that safety net anymore from next week. There's not the safety net anymore of saying it's only pre-season. Points start being measured, and of course we've got the Europa Conference League playoff, which matters in terms of qualifying properly for the competition. So I think in terms of what this preseason has been, it was a much better day for Enzo Maresca, which is good on the eve of the season, but still some huge questions that I'm sure me, you, and many others will have before next week. But we'll delve into that as we reach the Man City game. So those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below, and I will see you again very soon. All the best.